The first thing the building did was breathe. It exhaled a smell of damp wood, old resin, sweat dried into varnish, and something metallic that reminded him of blood left too long in water. The corridor lights flickered in a rhythm that felt intentional, as if the school were counting something invisible. When he poured the bucket and the water spread across the floor, the surface caught the light and turned into a trembling mirror. In it, he did not see his own face. He saw feet, bare, bruised, pointed, dragging, rising, repeating movements that had been carved into the building long before he arrived. It felt like trespassing inside a memory that did not belong to him. He had learned quickly where to place the bucket so it would not block the narrow crack between the door and the frame. That crack was an accident of age, a warping of wood no one had bothered to fix, and it became the most important opening in his life. Through it spilled music that never quite reached the corridor, notes dulled and bent as if they were ashamed to leave the room. Through it he watched his daughter move, her thin body swallowed by mirrors, her hair pulled so tight it seemed to stretch her thoughts backward. Every evening he wiped the floor slowly, not because it needed such care, but because slowness was the only way to remain unnoticed. Their apartment had taught them how to be quiet. It was small, with walls so thin that the neighbors' lives pressed in from all sides. But it was also empty in a way that swallowed sound. Poverty hollowed rooms. It ate furniture first, then color, then hope, until even voices felt like unnecessary luxury. His daughter's dream of ballet had arrived there like a foreign object, bright and sharp, impossible to hide. It had frightened him at first. Dreams required space, and they had none. The arrangement with the school was never spoken aloud in a way that felt official. It existed in nods, in averted eyes, in a piece of paper that listed his duties and omitted any mention of his daughter. He cleaned corridors, stairwells, storage rooms, and sometimes the edges of studios after everyone else had left. In return, she was allowed to stand at the bar among children whose parents smelled of perfume and leather instead of detergent and cold air. Every day felt borrowed. Every evening felt like theft. As weeks passed, he began to notice changes in her body that no one else commented on. Her feet grew stronger but also stranger, adapting in ways that looked almost unnatural. Her arms learned to float without shaking. Her spine found a quiet authority. He watched all of it through the crack, his hands rough and red from chemicals, his back bent, his breath held as if sound itself could break the spell. Pride mixed with fear until they were indistinguishable. He knew how fragile this world was. He also knew how cruel it could be when it decided someone did not belong. The school emptied late. The last echoes of laughter and instruction faded, and the building returned to its breathing. He finished his assigned work, but some nights he stayed. He told himself it was because there was always more dirt, more corners that needed attention. The truth lay deeper, in a place he rarely visited. When the lights dimmed and the mirrors turned dark, the corridor became a border between who he was and who he had been. Long before his daughter was born, his own body had learned the language of movement. It had been a secret language, practiced in rooms that no longer existed, under teachers whose names had dissolved into dust. Life had intervened with its blunt tools. Hunger, responsibility, illness, the slow erosion of time had taken that language away word by word until only a physical ache remained. Here, alone, surrounded by silence and ghosts, his body remembered without permission. He moved carefully at first, afraid of the sound his bones might make. His feet traced patterns on the freshly cleaned floor, leaving no marks. His arms lifted, heavy with years of labor, and then surprised him by feeling light. The mirrors did not flatter him. They showed a man bent and scarred, a cleaner pretending at art. Yet something else appeared too, something precise and unbroken, like a line that had never been erased, only covered. These nights became rituals. He learned the timing of the building, the way the heating pipes clicked before cooling, the moment when outside traffic thinned enough that the silence inside felt absolute. He danced without music, counting internally, measuring breath against movement. He did not think of audiences or stages. He thought of survival. Movement had once been his way out. Now it was his way to stay. Unbeknownst to him, the ritual was not as private as he believed. One evening his daughter returned for something forgotten, a small object that mattered more to her than it should have. She pushed the door quietly, already accustomed to invisibility, and stopped. From the shadows she watched a figure she barely recognized. The man's movements were restrained but exact, filled with a sorrow that looked deliberate. She did not understand what she was seeing, only that it felt like discovering a hidden room inside a familiar house. She left without sound, carrying the image with her like a secret inheritance. From that night on, something shifted in her dancing. It was subtle, the kind of change teachers noticed only after it had already taken root. She began to anticipate movements instead of reacting to them. Her transitions grew smoother, her pauses more confident. She seemed to know where her body was going before instruction reached her ears. Praise followed, then curiosity, then suspicion. Talent was admired, but unexplained talent made people uneasy. The building felt the change too. The corridor lights flickered more often. The air grew heavier as if charged. He sensed it without understanding. His cleaning grew more meticulous, his movements smaller, his dances shorter. Fear returned, crouching beside pride. He had crossed an invisible line, and lines had consequences. The day everything broke arrived without ceremony. It was ordinary, wrapped in routine disguised as safety. The door opened wider than it ever had before. Light spilled into the corridor, harsh and exposing. He stood frozen, his body caught mid-remembrance, his hands empty of tools. The silence that followed was thick, judgmental, final. No explanations mattered. No history mattered. The building had decided. By evening his access was gone. Keys were taken. Tasks erased. The corridor returned to being just a corridor. At home, his daughter sat quietly, absorbing the change with an understanding that hurt more than anger would have. The dream did not shatter loudly. It folded inward, sharp edges cutting as they closed. Neither of them spoke of blame. Blame required language, and language felt insufficient. Years would pass, carrying them into different versions of the same struggle. The official future vanished, replaced by something smaller and more defiant. In forgotten spaces, on broken stages, movement survived. The school remained behind them, pristine and fearful, unaware of what it had lost. And somewhere between wet floors and remembered steps, a legacy persisted, unresolved and burning, waiting to be seen even if no one was watching. Time did not heal what happened. It only rearranged the pain into shapes that were easier to carry. The city around them changed faces, swallowed old districts, painted over cracks, but their life remained narrow and careful. Work came and went for the father, always physical, always temporary, always smelling of chemicals or dust. His eyesight worsened slowly, almost politely, as if even blindness was ashamed to arrive all at once. The daughter grew into her body like a question that never received an answer. She stopped speaking about ballet entirely. Words were dangerous. They invited hope, and hope still hurt. Instead, movement became private, almost feral. She practiced wherever space allowed, in abandoned halls, in community centers that smelled of mold and cold tea, on stages where the curtains were permanently half-closed. There were no mirrors, no approval, no hierarchy. Only the floor, sometimes warped, sometimes wet, and her body testing its limits again and again. The father followed when he could. He sat in the dark, close enough to feel vibrations through the floor, far enough not to interfere. His vision blurred faces and details, but movement remained visible to him longer than anything else. Motion cut through darkness. He recognized pieces of himself in her dancing and felt both pride and guilt sharpen with age. He had given her something essential and taken something essential away. Both truths coexisted without canceling each other. One winter, colder than the others, she was invited to perform alone at a decaying cultural hall scheduled for demolition. The building was nearly empty, its audience consisting of dust, broken seats, and a few shadows. The heating barely worked, and condensation gathered on the floor, turning it slick and reflective. As she stepped onto the stage, the surface reminded her of stories she had never been told directly, but somehow knew by heart. Wet floors, dim lights, watching eyes. She danced not for recognition, not for rescue, but out of defiance. Her movements were sharp, unpolished, filled with anger she no longer tried to soften. The choreography had no official name, no lineage. It was built from fragments. What she had learned, what she had seen, what she had stolen from silence. The floor accepted her weight and reflected her back in broken pieces. In the darkness of the hall, the father felt something shift. The vibrations through the floor grew unfamiliar, heavier, urgent. He sensed risk before it happened, the way a body trained by labor and loss often does. His hands clenched uselessly. The stage lights flickered, stuttered, then stabilized. She continued, faster now, pushing past caution, chasing a finish that felt necessary. When she slipped, it was almost graceful. The fall unfolded slowly, as if time hesitated out of respect. The sound was dull, final, unmistakable. Her body did not move afterward. For a moment the hall returned to breathing, indifferent and patient. Then the silence broke in ways the building had not heard in years. The injury ended her ability to dance in the way she always had. Bones healed imperfectly. Pain became permanent. Doctors spoke gently, avoiding absolute words while meaning them. The unofficial future closed just as firmly as the official one had before. Rage burned hot and then hollowed out, leaving exhaustion behind. Months later, after recovery forced stillness upon her, she returned alone to the ruined hall. The stage was darker now, stripped, waiting for demolition. The floor was dry. She stood at its edge and realized something that made her chest tighten with a new, unfamiliar emotion. Her life in movement had never truly been about stages or institutions or permission. It had been about transmission. At home that night, she cleared space in the small apartment. Furniture shifted. The floor was uneven, scarred, honest. She moved carefully at first, adjusting to pain, listening to her body's altered language. In the other room, her father heard the sound and recognized it instantly. Not specific steps, not technique, but intention. He leaned against the wall, eyes clouded, heart racing. She did not dance to escape anymore. She danced to remember and to preserve. Each movement carried history that had never been written down. She understood then that her future was not to be seen, but to see. Not to perform, but to teach, even if teaching meant only one person at first, even if that person was herself. Years later, children would gather in borrowed rooms, learning balance on cracked floors, learning discipline without cruelty, learning beauty without fear. They would never hear the full story. They would not need to. The knowledge lived in the body, passed hand to hand, foot to floor, breath to breath. On one quiet evening, long after his sight had nearly vanished, the father stood in a doorway, listening. The floor beneath him was damp from cleaning, the air sharp with familiar chemicals. Through a narrow opening, he sensed movement he could no longer see but still understood. His breathing slowed. The building around him felt distant. The moment felt complete. He did not know that the cycle had closed. He did not know that loss had transformed into something stubborn and alive. He only knew that the movement continued, and that was enough.